Hi, I'm Edgar Cabral with the Legislative Analyst Office, and in this webcast I'll be talking to you about our forecast as it pertains to funding for Proposition 98 programs, which include K-12 education and the California community colleges, which we refer to as K-14 education. Our forecast estimates the minimum amount of funding that the state would be required to provide to K-14 education to meet its obligations under Prop 98, and we call this the Prop 98 minimum guarantee. The guarantee is determined by a set of formulas that take into account various factors, including general fund revenues, growth in personal income, changes in attendance, and local property taxes. In the budget package that was adopted in July, the state provided $50.4 billion for Prop 98 programs in 2009-10. There are three major findings from our projections. First, we're seeing an increase in the minimum guarantee for 2009-10. Then we're seeing decreases in 2010-11 and 11-12, and then finally increases from 2012-13 through 2014-15. Now let me discuss each of these periods separately. First, for the current year, for 2009-10, our forecast estimates that the Proposition 98 guarantee will be about $1 billion higher than what was provided in the Budget Act. Now, it might seem very counterintuitive that the Prop 98 requirement would go up given that our revenue situation has not improved. So let me try to explain this. The minimum guarantee is determined not just by the total amount of general fund revenues, but it's also very sensitive to the year-to-year changes in these revenues. The calculation that was made for the July budget used 2008-9 revenue estimates that are now outdated. And our new estimates of these revenues is $2 billion lower than the number that was used in the budget. So this reduction in 2008-9 revenues results in a year-to-year change from 8-9 to 9-10 that is now higher. And this results in a higher Proposition 98 minimum guarantee. Now, because the minimum guarantee is very sensitive to these changes in revenues, as we just talked about, we recommend that the legislature wait until May, when better revenue estimates are available, to really address the problem. If an obligation still exists at that point, then there are three options for the legislature. The first option is simply to just make the payment in 2009-10. But given the state budget shortfall and the state's current situation, greater reductions would need to be made to other state programs to free up the resources to provide this funding to K-14 education. Now, the second option would be, rather than paying immediately, the legislature could create what we call a settle-up obligation. And that would create a multi-year payment plan for retiring the obligation. This provides some budget savings in the short term because the state is not required to provide the full $1 billion this year, but in the long term there is no savings. The third option for the legislature would be to suspend Proposition 98. This requires a 2/3 vote of each house in the legislature and would allow the state to maintain its current spending and save $1 billion in 2009-10. And because it would reduce the Prop 98 base moving forward, it would also reduce the minimum guarantee by about $1 billion a year in future years. The state would have an obligation to restore the funding in the future, but it's not likely to be required within the next 5 years of the forecast period. Now let's talk about the next 2 years, 2010-11 and 11-12. We are projecting declines in the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee during this period. We expect a small decrease in 2010-11, but a larger decrease of about $2 billion in 2011-12. Reducing funding to about $49 billion. These 2 years could be very difficult for schools and community colleges because in addition to these possible reductions in state spending, they would no longer be receiving the $6 billion in federal funding that was provided through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Prior reductions to state spending in 2008-9 and 2009-10 were mitigated in part by this influx in federal funding. If these dollars are not backfilled by the state, then districts will have an even more difficult time coping with these reductions, both in state and federal funding. Because of this, we think it's important that the legislature explore options to minimize the impact of these budget reductions on school districts and community colleges by doing things like providing additional flexibility, eliminating certain state mandates, and looking for ways to improve efficiencies in K-14 education. Finally, in the last 3 years of our forecast, from 2012-13 through 2014-15, we see consecutive years of increases in the Prop 98 requirement, reaching almost $60 billion by 2014-15. We estimate that by 2013-14, funding for Proposition 98 programs would return to pre-recession levels. So that's our update on Proposition 98 and on the forecast. For more information, please see our report, California's Fiscal Outlook, which is available on our website. And thanks for your time.